Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. I wanted to get this one off my chest. I just did a hour-long fraud podcast episode with Sean Cook, who's our resident attorney on Guru Nation, our regular guest. We got into some warning letters, as he usually does. He brings up random warning letters, and one of them was a PI site, really. And I actually think, I know the PIs are responsible, but I actually think they are also victims in this case, and that's going to be a kind of a controversial topic. But we got to re-examine risk mitigation as sponsors and CROs and sites. So as a site owner, I have seen way too many. I've been through hundreds of site initiation visits where the most important things like patient safety, in my opinion, the hierarchy of risk mitigation at a site should start with, let's not kill or harm a patient. Everything else is not as important as that hierarchy. And I know that's like common sense to people like outside the industry or maybe even in the industry. But then if you ask yourself, well, how come we don't do training that way with that hierarchy? Because we don't. I sat in hundreds of SIVs. The safety stuff, yes, it's covered, but it's given just as much time as how long you need to take to enter data, how do you answer a query, how do you set up a diary, like the mundane things. And I know these are businesses, and I know that the data integrity and the data quality, that's risk for the sponsors. Like if we have a site that doesn't adhere to data integrity or they don't collect the data properly, the FDA will not allow. I understand that. I'm a business person myself at the end of the day. But as a human being, first and foremost, we're all human beings. At my site, ever since I started doing this, the first thing I tell my staff is like, hey, pay attention when you dose, especially like when you have oral pills as IP. You need to know less. You need to know, hey, what time you need to take it, how many a day, what do you not take it with, those kind of basic things, right? It's a little harder to screw it up. When you're talking about injections, monoclonal antibodies, injections, preparing the injections, infusions, preparing the infusions, corresponding the adjusted BMI to the dose, and then it starts getting complicated, and then you start outsourcing this stuff to medical assistants, and you don't pay attention, you can get cases where, like this warning letter Darshan read, they 10 times overdosed the subject, 10 times more than they should have in a pediatric trial, because they didn't pay attention to, they didn't prioritize this aspect, which in my opinion is the most important. Like, if you know your IP is a biologic or your IP has to be prepared, that's a huge risk that needs to be mitigated. And I think to not focus on that, or at least not give that more weighted slide time, more weighted discussion time than entering data, is a horrible way to prioritize what's actually important in these studies, which is patient safety first. So again, at my site, anytime we start a new study, I make my own hierarchy, and it's not just me, it's me and the clinicians sub-IPI. How do we not harm patients first? If we can successfully accomplish that, not harming patients, yeah, the data might suck. In our case, it doesn't, because we're in business, which we want to repeat business from the sponsors. But at least we could sleep at night knowing that, hey, patients have not been harmed during this trial. And I think you're seeing these warning letters where patients are getting randomized that are not supposed to. There's the indication where it could adversely impact the safety of the drug. They take another ConMed where it could interact dangerously with the IP. Like, these are the things we need to look out for. And when we create our source, I make sure these things are in the headers, I make sure everybody understands, hey, these are the things we need to avoid. Absolutely no questions asked. These are non-negotiables. Everything else, data entry, setting up a diary. You know, if I had to choose between whether my coordinators and my staff learn how to configure a patient an e-diary properly, or how to dose and give accurate instructions for dosing, and how to check for contraindicated medications and conditions appropriately, it's not even a question what I am emphasizing. Not even a question. We can deal with the mundane stuff later. And with the sponsors, I don't think that distinction is as clear, because to them, that data is money. And they say, well, that's the site, that's the PI's liability. Well, when the PI is doing like 10 studies, and you all know the PIs delegate everything to staff, I'm not saying they're not responsible, because they're the ones signing that 1572. But in an industry where we debate risk mitigation until we're blue in the face at all these conferences, we need to go back to the fundamentals of like do no harm to patients. And that's something that I see not being discussed enough. And again, I've sat through personally hundreds of SIVs where this stuff, it's not ignored, but it's given the same weight preference as data entry and e-diaries and quality of life surveys. Well, no, there are things that are way more important than your data entry, and that is patient safety concerns. And if you make a mistake on a data entry, okay, it's bad. You know, the FDA might have issues with that as well, but it's not something that you can't recover from. Whereas if you harm a patient, I mean, forget about business for a second, forget about FDA. If I, as a site owner, allowed a patient to be harmed, like where we could have prevented it because we got sloppy, forget business and everything else. I can't sleep at night. Like, to me, that's not worth it. So our priorities need to adjust. Our SIVs need to adjust. It needs to start with safety first. It should start with do not harm or kill patients. Here's how you don't do that. That starts with dosing. Here's how you're going to tell them to dose, or here's how you're going to prepare the dose. Here's how you're going to store the dose. Then it trickles down into other conditions they might have that are exclusionary, and why. I think explaining why is important. Other medications that they might be taking that are contraindicated or they need to wash off, and again, why. And I've sat through these SIVs. The why part is rarely brought up, and the why part is what makes the message stick. It's what makes the lesson sticky for the end user, which is the study staff in this case, especially when you're dealing with staff that these things may not be as obvious, like a medical assistant, a study coordinator. That's when you should start considering the why. So again, I want to know your thoughts on this. Like, subscribe, comment, share. I think we need to re-examine this stuff. Bye-bye.